Hi, welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So why do leadership teams say the future matters, then never make time for it? And even when they do make time for it, the research shows these conversations are often the least effective ones they have. Dr. Stefan Cousquer has dedicated extensive research to this critical issue. He has found that most leadership teams don't have a strategy problem, they have a time problem. Dr. Stefan is a professor, executive team coach, and organizational development consultant working at the intersection of strategy, leadership, and sustainability. He is professor of strategy and leadership and OD consultant at the Holt International Business School. He's highly experienced consultant with a background of senior leadership roles in businesses such as Accenture and BP. He also works with executive education programs in the areas of strategic leadership, sustainability, OD, and collaborative innovation. And in his consulting work, Stefan works with leadership teams in the areas of strategic transformation, system change, and top team effectiveness, which is fascinating areas. Somehow he finds time to also be a non-executive director on purpose. And this is a non-profit which develops leaders who can change the world through the work they do and the lives that they lead. And we're absolutely honoured that Stefan has made time for us and joined us today. Stefan is actually based in Madrid and you're dialing in from sunny Spain today, aren't you?
It is. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Brilliant. Well, welcome, Stefan. We're so glad to have you join us.
We're really glad to have you with us, and we've enjoyed looking at the work that you've done and reading some of the research you've been doing. So we've got lots of questions. I think it's going to be a really good conversation. So just to kick us off, can you just tell us a bit about the work that you do? What's your current focus?
Well, at some level, as a general perspective, I just do enabling systems change. But if I had a specialization, it is supporting top teams lead or enable their own strategic change in their organization. So I combine strategy and change on one hand with executive team coaching and bring it together because I found that most of the things that enable constrained strategic change journeys is often how the leadership team work together. It's not the only thing, but it's a critical thing in the success of organizational change. And that generally is either large corporates, whether it's a global financial services or bank or a large Scandinavian manufacturing company, but also central government, public service, NATO. So I'm just basically on both sides, the public and the private within kind of my consulting work. That's what I focus on. In my spare time, as you say, I also collaborate with York University on transformative systems change with Iran Faizi, which is far more at a kind of regenerative practice and place-based ecocentric work, often looking at how communities become more regenerative and the systems change around that. So that's what I do in my day job.
Fabulous. And I think one of the things when I was reading your research that stood out was that one of the phrases you used, that you said strategy is what you talk about, not just what you decide. So I thought that was really powerful. Can you just expand on that for a little bit for us and just kind of unpack it for the audience?
Yes. Well, I think it's one of those phrases that keeps following me around because it makes sense from lots of different perspectives. So what I found was that as a strategy consultant back when I started my work, I found that most of the strategic questions that people should inquire around within the organization, at least from my point of view, were very difficult to find spaces to talk about. And almost like the more important they were strategically, sometimes the harder it was to find space to talk about it. And then I kind of, through studying and doing a master's in organizational change and entered the world where actually the stories we tell and the conversations we have shape the worlds that we create. And OD training often was around actually the conversations we have enable the organizational change that we would like to have. And I think it's, and there's this kind of frame of organizations change one conversation at a time. Helps take this dialogical OD and put it into practice. And so I spend most of my research and practice work really focusing on where are these conversations happening and what's the quality of those conversations and how do we enable more impactful conversations in critical areas.
And you use the 3 Horizons framework in your work,
That's right.
which some people may not be, they might have an idea or not have an idea. So can you just explain what that is and then how you use it?
Well, it started off with this global financial services company where they were saying, we're all aligned on the future vision. We're just too busy to deliver it. And so basically they had a vision. They had their short-term operating priorities, but they didn't really have a pathway to connect the two that they had clarity on as a shared team. And so I'd done some Three Horizons work with some other projects around systems change and brought it in as a framework for them to really get clear on Horizon 1, what are my core concerns in my current way of operating. Horizon 3, which is my future aspirations for how I'd like the organization to be operating in the future. And then Horizon 2 is what are the key critical initiatives that form a pathway to take me towards that shared vision. And Horizon 2 conversations are really challenging because it's often around what enables these strategic initiatives to become successful when we're in a really busy organization, when lots of the time and resources are maintaining the existing way of operating. And so that's the Three Horizon framework. It's from Bill Sharp. It comes from, I think, originally the International Futures Forum, and then they've got a Three Horizon University. There's lots of wonderful podcasts and books and videos on it. But I've just found it a really helpful tool to link strategy and OD because it's not a linear time tool, and it enables you to really see which conversations are happening well and which ones the client needs help with.
Yeah, and you talk about using it as a mirror, don't you, for holding up as a mirror?
That was a bit by accident. So we were with this financial services French company working on the Horizon 2 because they said their 3 was all fine. And what we realized that the framework, the 3 lenses, was a powerful mirror on how the team dynamics and the team functioning was. So it was a bit by accident in a way. And we found that they had lots of trust to work well in Horizon 1 conversations and dashboards and information. But actually, there were lots of difficulties and relational tensions in Horizon 3 and 2 that they weren't quite able to have the conversation. And so it introduced this idea that actually we can have different levels in trust in different horizons, that we can have different quality of conversations in different horizons. And it provided a lens, almost like an acupuncture point, into what was enabling and constraining the team get aligned across all horizons, and how they needed to collaborate across all horizons or change how they were collaborating to have greater impact in the organization. So it was almost like a mirror on the underlying power and relational dynamics that were constraining the change they wanted to bring about.
Oh, lots to unpack there. And do you see which we will do, I think, as we go through the conversation, and do you see a pattern in kind of how much time top teams are spending in those 3 horizons? Is there, looking at the research?
Well, we kicked off a research project afterwards to look into that question. Yeah. So we worked with 8 executive teams and then checked our results with over 150 executives afterwards as a validation exercise. And strangely, the average is that executive teams, that's the top team of an organization, would like to shift 30% or more of their time from Horizon 1 to Horizon 2 and 3. So there's a 30% time allocation shift required. That's in the research. When I worked with teams, it starts off at 30 and then actually they realize that they need to spend even more. But actually it's quite frightening to think about that. And then the other thing that came out in the research was that nearly all teams, most teams, perceive themselves as being highly effective in Horizon 1, less effective in Horizon 3, so that's not as below the kind of average score, and considerably less effective in Horizon 2. Horizon 2 are the conversations around what's enabling and constraining this strategic transformative initiative, mobilize at pace or deliver at pace. And those conversations, they really struggled to have well, which was quite an eye-opener it was a mirror effect for them, the client, and for me as a consultant.
Yeah, Stefan, it's so fascinating, and it's provoked a lot of discussion between Danny and I in the last few days, because I think one of the things we really appreciate the way you've sort of explained the work, and we'd really encourage people to read your papers, is the precision you bring to it. You know, the fact that, you know, people can be very deliberate about when they're having certain types of conversations. You mentioned about Horizon 2, you know, that middle state between the now and the future, almost like the messy middle. You talked about relational tensions. What are some of those relational tensions that come up in Horizon 2 that makes it such a tricky and difficult time?
Well, you can come up with examples. No, that's always the best. So one client we've been working with for over 2 years now is that they're moving from a product-centered organization where they're selling products to customers. And with the rise of AI, data-enabled services, sustainability, etc., they're needing to shift their offering towards much more of a service offering. And they're targeting customers that are much more senior. They're not at the procurement manufacturing level, but at a much more of a C-suite senior leadership. And so in that transformation, product to services, there's a shift in power from not just the product development area to marketing, but also I would say almost from sales to marketing and strategy, if that makes sense. And there's a different type of sales person required to sell services into senior leadership as to sell more engineering products into procurement or manufacturing. And so that shift from product services in a way is becoming much more customer centric and a different customer. So there's always in these strategic change some shift in power that is going on that is difficult to talk about. And issues of purpose. Is that really who we're becoming? What are the capabilities we need in that new way of operating, that new operating model? And if we start to take that lens, where do we allocate resource? Saying there's a big function over here and a little function over here, and we need these new capabilities. And we recruit somebody from, from Amazon, and they come with their marketing expertise, and they go, well, why are we spending marketing on a product that we're actually not growing, that's been there for a while? Why don't we spend all our money on the new one? And so at some level, you can say, well, there's an LD approach, which is we create all these wonderful capabilities on transformation and strategy and change. But at the heart of it, when you bring the real life case of the organization, many of the key things that enable the transformation, the organizational change, come back down to, unsurprisingly, the relational dynamics between the team, the power dynamics, the being able to host a conversation around what that means for me in my role, what that means for me in the team. Am I an appropriate CEO for this new organization? And all those dynamics are the underlying tensions that are below in the iceberg model that somehow we need to create a space to help them with. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Well, again, it just shows you why that Horizon 1 is just so seductive to stay in, isn't it?
Yes.
It's so concrete, and, you're going into the domain of winners and losers and identity and all sorts of different things as well, aren't you?
Yes, or perceived losers. And also, it's not just if you take individuals, it's the whole system, which is what was one of the key findings, both with clients and in the research, is that we tend to focus on individuals, but it's also the strategy processes and organization and performance management processes that keep the focus on Horizon 1. It's also the HR and organizational development processes, because we promote people from big P&Ls. And the big P&Ls are traditionally the business model that we're transforming to. The high-risk new businesses, it's a lot harder to get promoted from that with smaller P&Ls. It's a risk. So how we reward and promote, and often is a critical enabler of transformation. And many cases in the research were people that had been promoted. One of the CEOs of a bank, he'd been promoted from operations. He loved relational banking. He was very comfortable in the relational banking operations space. He was less comfortable in kind of the bank is increasingly an AI automated space. And he didn't have many of the technological capabilities or vision, including the regulator, but many of his team were concerned about whether he was the right person to lead. And those tensions play out. And it was only once he was able to talk about it and share with the team and have the confidence that actually they started collaborating far better as a team. Right. And he was able to navigate and lead the team through it well.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that was occurring to me as you were talking, quite often when we're working with organizations or they're thinking about transformation, they'll bring in somebody external to lead the transformation.
Yes.
Expecting that to be the kind of silver bullet yes. That's going to, well, we've not been able to really kind of lock into the transformation. We'll bring in somebody external, expecting that to be the thing that unlocks it. But actually, all of those systems and processes and the kind of enabling constraints are still there. It's just a different kind of actor. So,
and I think there are a few more extra dimensions to that. Yeah. Is that if we knew exactly the final end state, and we want to implement a new SAP system, then in some ways it's a more of a linear approach, and you can ask somebody in the function to deliver it. And when it comes to more strategic change or organizational transformation, it requires the leadership team to collaborate as a team on cross-functional initiatives, not just focus down on their individual functions. And that is an identity shift. So you're not just a head of sales. You're a head of sales and playing a part of the organizational transformation. And that's a really difficult shift. And it's a dynamic one because you need to keep learning and adapting. And the teams that delivered the transformations really well in the research were the ones that built this dynamic team learning processes where they collectively learned about how they needed to adapt their roles and their responsibilities along the journey, rather than just appoint one person to really deliver on one project.
One of the things you talk about in the paper you shared with us is often the go-to tool to try and build this capability or the appetite to do it is the usual suspects: coaching, maybe team away days, those kind of things.
Yes.
What has your research and what has your own field work actually shown you that is sort of an accelerator of building that capability?
Well, I guess the reason why traditional team coaching doesn't work is that it's largely a structural problem, as in it's many things that are maintaining and locking the team in the temple trap of Horizon 1. Now, you could say with enough team coaching, they could gradually work on it. But I think there's something really powerful if you can help the team see very quickly how they are trapped in a structural problem and how they need to collaborate to get out of it. And often by splitting, I'm just doing the team coaching on the relational side, away from the strategic organizational side, you don't get the conversation between the two. So that's why I think actually it's really powerful to combine team coaching with organizational transformation coaching.
One of the things we'd love you to bring to life is you talk about there being 6 conditions for systems change. Are you able just to shed a little bit more light on that in terms of what those conditions need to be and how organizations need to approach it?
Yeah, I think you're referring to systems change models, the waters of systems change that I'm pinched and used. I think it comes from Senga and team. So what I found is that when using the 3 horizons to explore what's enabling and constraining change in each of the horizons, we generally end up with a number of things that come out that fit quite nicely onto that model. There's the kind of more structural pieces at the top, which are around, we've got a new policy or a new strategy or a new process or a new reward system. But that's all kind of inputting stuff into the existing operating system. But many organizations are realizing that their existing operating system doesn't work for the new world that's arriving, or it doesn't work to enable them in their transformation. And they need to shift that operating system. And then lots of the enablers and constrainers, or the things that release the potential for change, tend to fall into the 3 things in the bottom of the pyramid, which is relationships and relational dynamics. Often an organizational change will require new and different relationships, often outside the organization, but also new relationships within the organization. And so relationship robustness and engagement on the journey is a critical enabler. The second piece is the power, getting really clear from a systems point of view and sometimes even doing simple things like the drawing out the systems on a page collectively with different stakeholders, where's the power shifts? Where do we need to redistribute power as the senior team and help the power be redistributed to enable the innovation or the change? So power is the second one. And then the last one is mental models. And mental models is one of those overused words, but it's still really helpful to say, what are some of our assumptions about how we can deliver this change that need to be challenged? And what are some of the ways that our counterparties and I am perceiving this challenge that need to be questioned? And who can really provide a fresh perspective on that? And so how, as a leader, we host spaces for mental model shifts is really important, because it's often a participative, non-efficient conversation. And so actually prioritizing it is really important. So that model is just a helpful model for senior teams to work out, what conversation am I trying to host? And how do I design a conversation that allows me to get into relationship power mentor models? Or how do I design a conversation or host or convene a conversation that is much more structural, much more about policies and practices and procedures?
I was going to say, just unpacking Horizon 2 a bit more. We've talked about how difficult some of those conversations might be because they're talking about power and identity and shifts. How, as OD practitioners, can we help senior teams surface those tensions that doesn't automatically trigger kind of defensiveness or kind of shut down? Because we're treading on difficult territory, aren't we, with those teams? What advice have you got for practitioners kind of facing that and thinking, okay, how do I navigate this?
Well, it sounds really simple, but having a shared language to talk about it is really important. Because I think one of the, if your dominant culture is Horizon 1 framed, you need another language to talk about Horizon 2 and 3. And then helping them inquire. All my answers to your questions of what would I recommend it comes back to dancing in the systems. There is no magic bullet if I step back. You need to start and develop a relationship with the client, start practicing small, develop a shared language, and then prototype and try others. And so that's the dance. But some of the things on the dance that are helpful are helping them inquire into how do we host a good conversation around Horizon 2? What do they see as some of the dynamics of relationships and power and trust that are playing out here? Then to practice hosting it, and then to reflect and learn, well, did that work well? Did that not work well? How could we do it differently? What are some of the issues that maybe I can prepare beforehand that would make it work? Do we even have the right participants in? And so, for example, I often I'll get a leadership team to saying, well, if you want to explore this project, who are some of your inquiry buddies in the whole project? So get them to find a buddy that provides a fresh perspective, and then bring the buddy to the meeting. And I remember with the banking project, we were using some Lego Serious Play, and the buddy for the CEO wanted to, I said, well, is the CEO on your model? And he goes, no. So he goes off. And he finds a lion and a chicken. And he puts the lion and the chicken on it. And the CEO goes, why am I a lion chicken? And goes, well, in the bank, you're like a lion, but when the regulator comes, you're like a chicken. And actually, if we're going to actually be proactive and not just on the defense and invest in something which would allow us to really move forward, we need to turn that chicken into a bit more of a lion and that lion into a bit more of a chicken. Now, but the buddy and the perspective and the way that there was enough play and trust allowed for some of the fundamental issues of relationships and power. Because you can see, even in that story, you've got the relationship with the regulator and the CEO and the people in the team. And you've created a space where you can actually start to talk about it. And some of those interactions are the most transformational. And you can't plan them or prepare them. They're emergent.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because we totally agree. After, I think this is episode 103 that we've recorded. So, and I think definitely if we had to say one of the mantras, it depends, doesn't it? There is a dance in any system. Yeah. I guess one of the things I'm sort of curious about is, how do you contract and get informed consent to engage this? Because this is senior team, like you to have their time is very precious, isn't it? And obviously you can't predict what's going to happen, and some of the feedback might be quite painful for a CEO to say, I didn't see myself as a chicken and now I see it. How do you get that consent, and who do you contract with to get that started, to have those conversations?
That's, I would say, an ongoing challenge. And there's no simple way in. I think all my clients have come through slightly different routes in. I would say the most common route is that you're doing a sort of senior leadership program of the C-suite -1, and you invite the C-suite in, and then they build a relationship of trust. The trust needs to come from some joint activity. And they need to trust you on three things. One, you know your stuff from a kind of business perspective and strategic change perspective. You know your stuff from a team coaching perspective. And as a human being, they can trust you. Now, how do you find the space to get that relationship? You just need a good excuse. So that good excuse can come from a leadership development program that they've sponsored. It can come from, I've got a team coaching challenge. And then you help them to say, well, actually, you've got quite good trust in Horizon 1. how do we explore? But you've built the trusting relationship through team coaching. And sometimes it happens through one-to-one coaching, where you start as a one-to-one coach and then you move into team coaching. So I don't think there's one route in. I think there's different routes in. There's a chemistry between you and the senior team. You need a sponsor who's kind of CEO type level or on the executive team. But I haven't found a clear, easy way in that I could say, just do that. I still struggle with it, actually.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate that as well, because, like I said, every system's different. A lot of people that are watching this will actually be internal as well. So we have lots of people that are consultants, a lot of people internal. Is this the exclusive domain of an external consultant? Only can an external consultant come in and try and facilitate these kind of conversations, or can it be done from within, or is it a partnership?
It depends what we call it. So can internal consultants and heads of HR help leadership teams connect strategy and organization development, use the 3 Horizon framework to do that, and start coaching the team lead strategic change? Then yes, you can do it internally. Is there an advantage to having an external person doing it? Yes. What's that advantage? Is that it's a lot easier for us to name some of the power, trust, and purpose and issues, both because if we've got the credibility of doing it in lots of other organizations, I think the senior team hear it differently. But also, if we say something and we get kicked out, it's not the end of the world as much. So I think I take more risks when I'm external, but I also perceive executive teams listening to me different if I walk in with an external hat on. And I also think is that once you're out, if you've got one for outside the system, you can see the power dynamics easier than when you're in the system. So there's something about if you're a fish in a fishbowl, it's hard to see the power dynamics. As soon as you've got one foot out the fishbowl, it becomes a lot clearer. So I don't think it's because I'm different in any way. I just think it's easier if you've got one foot out of the system to see what's going on. I'm useless with my own family. It's a lot easier to spot everybody else's family dynamics.
Amen to that. Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarizes all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback.
So, Stefan, in one of your papers, you say that the biggest barrier to future making is rarely strategic intelligence, it's relational safety. Could you just expand on that a little for us? Well,
if I think about one client team, I remember an ongoing tension between the head of strategy that wanted to have some strategic decisions and stereotypically the head of HR was saying, actually, we need to be able to have robust conversations and important dialogue. And they were both really right. But I guess the reason we arrived at this conclusion that came out in the paper was that when I asked what enabled or constrained the big strategic insights and the big strategic shifts in the organization, it often came down to somebody taking a risk or investing time in building a robust enough relationship to bring different points of views in, and leaders creating a safe enough space where different voices could be heard. And we often think that it's the same voices for Horizon 1, 2, and 3, but often they're very different voices. And we make lots of assumptions about it. I remember one organization, they assumed the CFO, because he had a big motorbike, he wasn't that interested in sustainability. That's why he wasn't reporting it in the KPIs or financing the projects. But actually, when they had the courage to have the conversations, and what sort of future do you really care about? And that's not an easy conversation on an executive team to have. And how would you like to leave this organization for your children or for the future generations? They suddenly realized that he was one of the most passionate supporters. He just didn't realize he could be, or didn't think he had the capabilities to, or was worried he'd have double standards because he couldn't live his life in a completely sustainable way that he wanted to. He wanted to be coherent. But once that conversation started to happen, he was one of the best leaders in the group in driving profitable new sustainable offerings.
And there's two threads I just want to pull out of that. The first one is that often the senior leadership team is quite static, isn't it? It's the usual suspects lined up. But like you're sort of saying, you have to be quite light-footed for some of these conversations. So do you find that many sort of teams are kind of sort of anchored in the traditional people to have in there, and it can be more difficult for them to be open to invite new members in? Or often once you get into it, then they are quite open?
It's slightly more... It comes back to 3 horizons. I'm a bit of a hammer with a nail in that they're very good at getting different voices in areas they're comfortable about, like Horizon 1, operations, current delivery, making sure sales currently work. To get different voices in around the future, when we explored in the research, what's getting in the way of you hosting and collectively sense-making with people that really understand the issues to governance on AI, the practical future issues you need to address. Often it's, I'm not sure, how do we do that and then make it practical? How do we do that and then harvest the output so that we can communicate to the organization what that means for us and then take decisions around it? So that we realized that there was a practice and methodology insecurity, and that what they'd found is that they'd either, to do that well and to host that well, they needed some support. So their tradition was, well, I either get a consultant to do it, then I don't do it. But if I need to do it, I need some help to do it, and which is where the OD consultancy comes in. As long as the OD consultancy has a depth of futures work and strategic foresight work to be able to facilitate it. So I would say the desire is there to do it. I think it's mainly a capability issue, and also that the existing organization squeezes the time out to do it well. And so it comes back to this structure systems challenge. But once they do it well and have the confidence, then I think the energy is released in the organization. If I think about the organizations that have released the most potential for change, is that the leadership team loves, in the end, hosting Horizon 3 and Horizon 2 type conversations. And because they realize that when you do it well, it releases so much energy in the organization. And in some ways, I wish they'd learned it earlier. It's a strange thing. I think we all stick to the conversations we're good at, rather than learning to do different conversations that we're less good at.
It's these patterns, isn't it? And then just a second thing I just wanted to point quickly was, you said the term safe enough rather than safe.
Yes.
What's the distinction between the two, and why does that matter?
Well, one of my bugbears with psychological safety is that if you're going to add any value, you need to take a risk. And that to disclose new worlds, new value, new relationships, new possibilities, that takes risk. And therefore, you don't want it safe, because then if you're completely safe, you're not taking a risk. Does that make sense? So we want to be able to develop a shared language where we can take a risk together and challenge each other and to be scared together. And that's okay. And we'll support each other through it, which is not safe. It's safe enough to take that risk. Most of the important conversations in life are often fairly risky, whether it's with your children, your partner, your parents, and it's the same at work.
So one thing we always like to ask our guests is, how did you end up working in this weird and wonderful field that is organisation development? What was your path into it?
It's one of those impossible questions, isn't it? Because if I had to pick some moments that shaped me, I would say one was when I started having children. I was at the same time that I was on one of these fast-track development paths and had some coaching, and I realized that I wasn't quite as emotionally and relationally intelligent as I thought I was. Or life was a lot harder than I thought it needed to be. I got recommended by my wife to go and do an integral coaching course, and I loved it. And it not just because it gave me coaching conversation capabilities, but I think it helped me understand a lot more kind of philosophically what's going on in the world. And that for me was individual development in some ways is the same as organizational or societal development, and seeing the links between the three and seeing how emotional, relational, spiritual, cognitive all play in. That was a seed that continues to unfold. I would say I also did a master's in sustainability at Ashridge, which was an introduction to kind of enabling systems change. And I think that's another seed that continues to unfold. And then I would say my experience in BP, trying to bring transformation within an oil and gas company, which has very different worldviews. And I realized then that most of the strategic conversations came down to the spaces that we can host difficult conversations and the power dynamics. And I realized I had very little training or support or colleagues to work with. And it was at a time, I think, where my third child was born, and I spent a week in Ashridge Gardens, and I decided to leave a one world and find a group of people which were in Ashridge that were actually bringing OD strategy and sustainability together in a consultant practice. So I say a week with some trees and a baby was a critical moment. And then maybe other ones is finding a tribe of people that you can work with and learn from and look after each other and take risks together. So I guess my practice is just a reflection of a load of relationships.
And Ashridge as a place to study, it's obviously Holt now. What's that like as a learning environment? What is it? What does it specialise in?
Oof. Well, I think Ashridge has gone through quite a journey. I would say the reason I went there is it has a history in taking, I would say, enabling systems or a living systems approach to coaching, to organizational development, to systems change, as well as being an executive education offering. And so I guess it's a place where you can study masters and get accredited and etc. But it also has a consulting OD practice as well as its executive education practice. But when you first asked the question, I remember when I first became an employee, I was speaking to a participant looking at the garden from China, and I said, well, why have you come all the way to Ashridge? And expecting to have a kind of living systems type response. And he said, the garden. And when I ask most participants that go, the thing they like the most is walking in the garden or being in nature. But I think it comes back to time. I think people have a different relationship with time when they're at Ashridge. There's the history of the place. And I think a chance to look at how they're leading from the perspective of nature's time, their life's time, and what they really care about in the time that's left, I think is a key enabler of change. So I would say Ashridge is many things to many different people.
What aspects of your work do you find most fulfilling or exciting, and why?
At a really simple level, it's a kind of the bit that I enjoy the most is the people I work with, either clients or colleagues, because we're living in a time between worlds, and actually having people learning together and taking risks together and trying to, with a shared kind of humanizing leadership type purpose, I think those relationships are what bring me lots of joy. I think the creativity of trying new approaches, finding unique journeys with different clients that fit them, the creativity side with a client I really enjoy. And and also the space to learn and the space to combine the scholarly, not too busy way of being, where I can think and reflect and what do I really care about, along with the practitioner being in organizations. So I think I would struggle to go back to a just delivery only, practitioner only. I quite like my scholarly practitioner way of being. And so I need to find systems I can hang out where that's allowed.
Fabulous. And then on the flip side, what do you find most challenging about the work?
I would say I regularly still get, if the client's challenge is acceleration, often they get accelerated and anxious. I notice I can regularly fall into that accelerated anxiety. So I would say anxiety and acceleration is a challenge that we have to contain for the clients, but contain for ourselves. And I often kind of fall off balance and have to rebalance this, creating a slow enough way of being that there's quality and care, with the practical need to come alongside a client, meet their needs, build the trust. And so that balance I find really hard. I would say maybe going in and out of different worlds. So one of the values I bring is that I can learn from different worlds and share the learnings across different worlds. But you have to learn different languages, different approaches, and be humble and practical in those different worlds. And that's not always easy. So finding the right language, often I find challenging. I would say there's increasingly finding the spaces to do the grieving and gratitude type work, the soulful work, the humanizing work. So getting the balance between the what you want to support with and then the how that enables a certain amount of healing. So it's the garden effect, even if you're working in a meeting in a boardroom, how do you build a sense of being that people yearn to have more of, that helps them find the courage and find themselves creating futures they care about? That's often a how question, not just a what question. And I find that's a challenge to keep bringing in. It's almost like the more it's needed, the harder you have to work to bring it in. And I guess that's for me personally as well as for the client.
Are there any, when you look at the field, are there any particular emerging topics or trends that are really interesting you or capturing your attention at the moment?
Well, it's a combination of old and new, if that makes sense. Because if we're in this accelerating AI, fragmenting world order, ecological disruption, that's all putting pressure on client organizations. And there's new stuff that's really interesting is how do you find ways to engage people in futures when they're accelerated in the short term? There's new stuff around how do you develop more resilient operating models when people just want to shift the what and not actually get clear how they want to operate. And so there's I would say the new bits of practice combined with the same old OD stuff that you need to weave in, like develop robust relationships, work out who your client is, maintain yourself as instrument reflexivity in service of the client, build trust. And so it's the conversation between traditional OD and new needs that I think is the really interesting space. How do you help an executive team build trust in a post-trust digital AI world? So old competency of trust in OD, new competency of new world. How do you shift the practice? How do you think about legitimacy in a team and now legitimacy in a institution where your employees don't trust hierarchy anymore? All I would say, what's the governance process? And how does the governance of an organization need to shift? And the team practices need to shift with this new world. All of these things are really hard. And what attracts me is how you apply the core OD skills to those new challenges.
Just want to just pull on a thread there. You talked about self as instrument, and that has been a recurring theme that's come up during the conversations, and particularly in the work that you do, because those Horizon 2 conversations, strategy is anxiety, isn't it? Because you're making tough choices, tough trade-offs. You're going to disappoint a lot of people with the choices that you make. And that self as instrument is so important, isn't it? Because we always have to be mindful of what's being projected onto us in terms of emotions that others are feeling, but we also have our own emotions too. And I guess one of the concerns that we have is that there's a lot of people coming into OD, which is great, but they're not necessarily doing the self as instrument work. You mean that kind of sort of self-awareness. If someone is sort of entering the work, what tips would you have for people to sort of make sure that they've got that awareness, or they feel resourced enough to be in that place where those difficult conversations can happen?
3 things. First is do some program that has some form of first-person inquiry in or action-based inquiry, where you have to kind of reflect on what's going on for you inside, write about it, reflect about it with others. So we call that inquiry work. There are loads of programs where that is kind of a core part of the program. So learning using self as instrument inquiry would be 1. 2 is work with people that do it and that can call you out when you don't do it. I'm still a kind of block. If it gets too tough, I block it like everybody else. But it's nice if your buddy says you're doing it again, what was really going on. And so you need to work with somebody who can call you out and help you. And then you even try and bring it in, get the client coach you as you're doing it, if you can build the trust. So have the confidence to bring it in. But most of the wisdom comes from that. It's just having the practice. And it's not easy. It's not like I've learned to ride a bike that I can ride a bike. Often it's really difficult work. It's messy work. So I would say go forward, go for it.
Well, I think it's really encouraging, isn't it? Because someone who is entering and looking and saying, this Stefan's so accomplished, he's so experienced, he's got all the qualifications, he's been out for. But it is still, all experienced consultants still have this, don't they? When we're out there and we're in that kind of moment where change is just happening and there's a lot going on, isn't there? At any particular time, it never ends the work, does it?
No, and it never ends because maybe you get better at spotting your patterns again. But that doesn't mean your patterns don't go away, if that makes sense. You just get better at accepting them and working with them, and maybe better at helping other people work with you. So I think it's just like it's a life thing. It's an ongoing practice. But I guess as time goes on, you realize more and more how important it is, and those that do it and those that don't do it. And I think it's also a fundamental leadership practice, not just an OD practice. I often think ODs, when I did an MBA ages ago, I remember accounting wasn't just for finance, it was for all leaders. And then I was thinking, well, afterwards, coaching shouldn't just be for coaches, it should be for all leaders. And when I joined Ashridge, I was thinking, well, this OD stuff shouldn't be just for OD practitioners, it should be for all leaders. And so there's a part of me that kind of goes, OD is just good leadership stuff. And using self as inquiry for me is like the core of good leadership.
For those listening on audio, you probably can't hear that me and Danny are just nodding our heads profusely about this.
I really agree.
You're defining something so wonderfully that I think people really need to hear. And I think it'll encourage a lot of people, won't it, Danny?
Absolutely.
If I was doing a kind of high potential evaluation or get ready for senior leadership, the number one skill for moving up into top leadership is using self as inquirer, if I had to just pick one.
When you look, this is a big question, but we'll hopefully distill it. When you look back at your career, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned so far that you take forward into the work that you do?
It is a big question. Well, in no particular order, I was thinking, we've talked about the using self as inquiry and the fact that I fall off the bike of that regularly and try and get back on. I would say another one was, I often found OD didn't overtly claim its expertise in strategy and connecting strategy to organizational change. So one of my big learnings was actually good OD is also being good at strategy or working with people that. So you can do strategy from an OD perspective, and actually connecting strategy and change is part of your OD practice is fundamental. Connecting the what and the how. Maybe another one is that, and that's me personally, is that I got fascinated by time, both how leaders work with time and their relationship to time and what they create time for, and what leaders care about is also what time they create for certain types of conversations. But it's the same at organizations and a society. I think we're in a time between worlds at the moment, where the old way of operating in many organizations doesn't fit the world we're living in, and that a new way is not quite emerging yet. And so I think one of my learnings is how time is a wonderful guide, and our relationship to time is a wonderful guide for OD practice, or for myself and OD practitioners. Maybe a third one is to be robust around who you work with and finding your tribe of people to work with and defending working in pairs, and also even just like your action learning set or supervision to spot patterns. Often the most impactful interventions came from a robust conversation with a colleague or a supervisor that challenged my way of looking at things and how I was colluding or not colluding in the system. So I guess my confidence in that, developing your tribe and your supervision and your container for your work in the systems is really important. I think anything else that I've learnt? My last one, if I had to ask one of my main clients, the HR director of a global manufacturing company, what would be the one thing that I haven't done so well that I should do better? And it seems to follow me around. So it's not the first time I've got the feedback. And so it is that I don't always come alongside the client in the way that they would necessarily want. And when I inquired as to why, I get so excited about where they could be going that sometimes I underestimate where they actually are, how much support or change they need to get going. I tend to be in a rush and maybe don't accept where they actually are. So I still need to, so I know cognitively that I need to come alongside a client, but I keep bumping into the same learning journey, even at 50, of really accepting where am I and where are they, and what's a good enough next step so that I can accompany them well, rather than running off ahead.
That's brilliant wisdom, isn't it? It's a conversation that Danny and I are constantly having to remind each other of. And I love what you were saying there in terms of working in pairs, because we work in pairs probably 90% of the time.
Yeah.
And the client always be, 2 of you? Really? Why? And at the end of it, they're like, oh. Because they're like, it's a 2-person job. But it is though, isn't it? Because there's so much going on. There's process, there's content, there's unexpected things happening, there's the uncertainty. It's as much for to keep it on the track as anything, isn't it?
Well, I would say most of the big shifts come from robustness of relationship, don't come from me being bright on my own.
Right.
And so you almost need the processing in the relationship, either with the client or with your buddy, and it's that processing of it that the insight comes out of. If I did it on my own, I wouldn't get it. And also to take a risk, you need to be held in relationship, both with the client and your buddy. So there are 101 reasons why I'm just getting excited and agreeing with you.
I think there's a book in here for this. Brilliant. You're obviously, clearly, you're extremely qualified and accomplished in your field, but what do you do to keep learning and evolving in your field? Are there any practices or habits that you found particularly useful?
Well, I would say I follow what I find myself caring about or have energy for. And I try and balance that with what am I fearful of, the pinch points, my shadow side. So I would say balancing shadow work with energy work and trusting that those take you to things that add value. I would say I think we're living in a accelerated, knowledge addicted world where we kind of searching for more resources. And I think resources and knowledge are helpful, but practice is probably more helpful. And so I don't necessarily do this well, but I try and balance devouring resources with walking in nature, with finding friends to have conversations about our work, with going for walks with clients and reflecting on our work. And so I would say finding tribe and finding practices and that actually feel regenerative and learning for, and balancing that with devouring more resources and knowledge and social media and books. That's I recommend. And then you're saying, what's my practice of developing myself? Well, I've gone on courses to courses, if that makes sense. I did a master's and another master's and then a doctorate. So I think there are vehicles and a coaching courses. So vehicles and containers for learning are helpful, especially if you're busy. But I guess I've balanced that with learning through relationships, finding relationships where there's difference and different practices, and then learning from each other.
Brilliant. And just coming back to resources, are there any particular books or podcasts that you'd encourage other people to look at and read or watch?
Well, I guess I'm interested in what's going on in the world. So I find like a Nate Hagens type podcast that connects the different crises and how they're connected together and taking a whole system view. So I would say I would go big and then deep personal. So I would say make sure you understand why we're in a time between worlds and understand how the crises are connected and why we have a debt problem, an economic problem, ecological problem, and an organizational problem. See the connections between the things, and then Hagen's type podcast can be helpful. I would also say find podcasts that talk about individual practices, whether it's psychology or and books that are meaningful. There's a certain amount of philosophy and understanding, not just psychology. So I think we tend to always go to the psychology. And I was saying with something that, even like Rilke's letters, or find your own way into philosophy in a nice way would probably be helpful in this time we're living in. And then if I had to pick resources that are an easy way into systems change, I always end up recommending Kahane's books, just because they're easy to understand, or easier. They point you to a field of work, and they take a whole system view to practice. And then the OD network, whether it's OD in Europe or OD in global, there's lots of places to go for more, I would say, traditional OD.
And one of the original missions of the podcast is to inspire the next generation of organisation development practitioners, whether they're internal, external. You've talked about this being an accelerated knowledge world that we're in as well. Like, what advice would you give someone who is just getting started or is wondering there has to be another way?
Oh, well, I got confused early on, I think, thinking OD was a profession and a particular job. And in some ways it is, but it's also just a way of thinking about change. And it's so I would say find the roles where people are open to talking about change in a participative, human-led way, where you can have conversations for change. So often you can get the best OD roles don't come along with an OD tag. And so my first advice would be find interesting roles where you can learn by doing. I would say there's some brilliant courses out there, whether it's coaching or OD or systems change or art of hosting, or find your way into systems change in a way that's practical to your role. And ask people who inspire you how they learn. And so build your tribe, I would probably say. But part of your question feels like making sense of the time we're living in. Because I think there's OD 20 years ago feels different than OD now. I think many more people are realizing that the world we're living in is changing, that many of the ways of looking at things no longer work, but there isn't a new way of exactly how we do this. So I would probably also say, find your place-based community, find what gives you regenerative energy. Daniel Val's book on living systems and regenerative cultures is a good introduction to regenerative systems change. So I would say don't necessarily think OD is different from regenerative systems change. Connect the two. And don't assume adults and old, bold people on podcasts have all the answers. I think we need a conversation across generations to address the time we're in. So I would encourage them. I think we need youngsters to help us navigate the next years we're going to work in as OD practitioners.
Brilliant. Well, Stefan, I want to say a huge thank you. This has been such a brilliant conversation. You managed to combine expertise, depth of knowledge, field experience, real precision to the work, but also really wonderful humility as well, which is a really nice combination. Danny, what are you taking away from the conversation?
I think it's hard to do justice in a few points, but I think I've really enjoyed unpacking the 3 horizons model and reframing that not as a planning tool, but as a mirror and a lens that teams can look at to think about the conversations they're having. I think the importance of shared language. I also really enjoyed the idea that the importance of inviting others into conversations, particularly around Horizon 2 and Horizon 3, and being more open to that.
Brilliant. Ditto all of those. I guess there was something that you said in one of your papers that I just loved, and I think that kind of sort of sums up, which is your legacy is written in the conversations you create. And I think that's like, that doing it with intention and mindfulness, and the fact that you can assess and audit where your team is, and there's ways and means of doing it, but you need to do the dance within that system to make it and bring it to life as well. Stefan, it's been a really wonderful conversation. If you want to follow your work, if they want to read your papers, if you want to learn more about Holt, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
I suppose on LinkedIn, just send me an email. I'm not very good at getting web pages sorted out. So just connect on LinkedIn, email me, and I'd be happy to respond and share work. And one day I'll get a web page out and have a way of doing it properly. But please feel free to reach out.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. If you are watching this and you're one of the people in 109 different countries now that are watching this podcast, and you think, do you know what? I know someone that could really do with Stefan's insights, then please feel free to share the podcast. We have so many shares each week for people that are sharing it to people in their network that can appreciate this insight as well. And also, if you could hit the like button and subscribe, the more subscribers we have, the more people, that really accomplished people like Stefan, that will say yes to coming on the podcast as well. But most of all, we want to say a huge thank you, Stefan. We know you're intensely busy. You make such brilliant time for us, and also answering our questions in depth as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed the conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you.